Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Between the 20s, the official podcast of the Sports Business Association. Very excited. Here we are doing a week 2 NFL fantasy football preview. We have a great show here for you. How we're going to do this, first we're going to go over a few news headlines, and then we're going to move into 5 lineup questions that we're going to address for the week. Of course, I, Michael, am joined by my two colleagues, Amer and Bryce. Amer, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Ready for week 2. NFL season's in full swing. Let's get it.
Yes, it is. And Bryce, how about you?
Doing well. Excited for, this week starts up tonight. Little Panther Buccaneer action. Excited to get started with the second week of the football season.
It is great. Great to be back in football season, in full swing. It is going to be another great week in the NFL. So, to start, I believe, Amer, you had some news.
Yeah, so we just wanted to start out with some news and notes before we get into these listener-submitted questions. So we got 5 quick headlines for you that have broke recently in the past couple of days. So we'll start out with Le'Veon Bell, who did not practice on Wednesday or Thursday with a shoulder injury. He was set to have an MRI, and it came back with no significant damage, but it is a situation that you need to look for into the future, and especially imminently for this Monday night game, Jets versus Browns.
Yeah, and I think from there, Ty Montgomery really becomes the viable option out of that backfield. You guys starting Montgomery if you have him on your team?
Probably not. Browns aren't a great matchup against the run. And either way, not a big fan of Montgomery's usage. And I don't know how that's going to look. We know Jamison Crowder is going to get his share too. 17 targets last week. Probably not starting Montgomery, but Le'Veon Bell probably should be fine, but we'll have to monitor the situation as it goes on.
Yeah, if you have Le'Veon Bell, just keep an eye on it. I'm actually going to disagree with you guys on Ty Montgomery. I think if Le'Veon Bell doesn't play, they're actually going to lean on the run this week, especially with Sam Darnold, who we'll get into a little bit later, out for this Monday night matchup. So I think Ty Montgomery is going to get a good amount of volume. So I think he is a mid-tier flex play this year at that running back position.
Yeah, I can see mid-tier flex and definitely at least a 10-team and probably a 12-team league for sure. But still always rough to count on the Jets. In our second piece of injury news, Derrius Guice's injury is severe, and he appears to be going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. He will miss at least 6 to 8 weeks, I should say. Likely to miss the remainder of the season. And obviously now the featured back there in Washington is the one and only Adrian Peterson. How do you guys feel about AP going forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough injury for Derrius Guice. He obviously tore his ACL last year, so it's a tough break for this kid going into his second year. But with that being said, meniscus injuries are pretty severe. Like Mike, you mentioned, likely to be out for the rest of the season, which is not what you want. So I think maybe unless you have an IR spot, I think Derrius Guice is definitely droppable. And with that, I think Adrian Peterson becomes definitely a top 30, maybe around a top 25 running back the rest of the way in fantasy for this season.
Yeah, Derrius Guice, I also think is droppable. Same ranking for me for Adrian Peterson, one of those kind of mid-tier flex plays, more closer to the RB30 spot. In addition to Adrian Peterson, this injury is also going to help Chris Thompson. He'll always get his share, even with Derrius Guice. Had a solid week last week, but he could get some ground carries too, as Adrian Peterson's getting back into the swing of things. So I moved Chris Thompson up my board in addition to Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, I think at the very least, you're going to go matchup by matchup with AP. Especially, I wouldn't start him week 2 because he's coming off of basically being healthy scratch in week 1. So I don't think the Redskins are necessarily going to put full faith in him in this week, and they are going up against the Cowboys. But I think it's sort of a matchup to matchup, and at best a mid-tier play, mid-tier flex play, I should say, as you said, Bryce.
All right, moving down to the next piece of news, we got Tyler Lockett, who with a back injury did not practice at all on Wednesday, which is concerning. It's like a midweek injury. He picked it up, looks like after the game at some point. And back injuries are always has the potential to be pretty severe. So Tyler Lockett, his status is in question, something to monitor. What do you guys think of Tyler Lockett this week?
I'm pretty sure or at least last I heard, was that he's on track to play. Obviously had an underwhelming week last week, only 2 targets, 1 catch. Fortunately, it did go for a touchdown. If he plays, even with this questionable injury, I definitely start him in most flex spots, even a wide receiver 2. But even with this injury lingering, DK Metcalf is going to move up boards. He's been moving up since he had a bigger day on Sunday. And if Tyler Lockett misses time, DK Metcalf is certainly a flex viable receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally down on both Lockett and Metcalf. I just really don't see that Seahawks passing offense as viable when it comes to fantasy. They just don't have the targets really to go around for the receivers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you there, Mike. I think especially with the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, the way it is, the way they got pretty much cleared out last weekend against the Patriots on that Sunday night game, their secondary definitely has some vulnerabilities. So I think, as Bryce said, Tyler Lockett's a definite start out of the slot against the Steelers defense. And if he can't go, if he's injured this weekend, then I think DK Metcalf is hovering around the wide receiver 20 for this week too. I think he could have a big week.
Just for Metcalf, real quick, I think wide receiver 20 is on the higher end of where I'd put him. I'd probably put him closer to wide receiver 25 to 30, just because, remember, Chris Carson led that team in targets last week. So if Lockett does miss time, Carson might take some of those targets, but that remains to be seen. DK Metcalf, though, if Lockett misses time, definitely a starter.
Yeah, I'd say Metcalf is a 42 currently on the consensus half PPR week 2 rankings at Fantasy Pros. I like him there. I know you guys probably a little higher on him, as you just said, Bryce.
Yeah, so moving on now to our 4th piece of news. Some sad news here. Hunter Henry out a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks. Many reports estimate an even longer recovery time. This one's tough. As you remember, Hunter Henry missed the entirety of last season with an ACL tear, was supposed to come back, really take the world by storm, take the NFL world by storm. And this injury is kind of killer. 4 to 6 weeks minimum. What do you guys think about Hunter Henry's status on your roster?
Yeah, this is a tough injury, again, for Hunter Henry. Last year, he had the ACL, and then this year he's got this tibial plateau fracture, which is a really serious injury. It happened in his other knee across, like on the other side of his body. So that pretty much gives him 2 injured knees, which is not great, especially when he's a physical tight end. So I think it's going to be tough for him to come back from this, especially this season. So I do think Hunter Henry's droppable in most leagues. Again, if you have an IR slot, maybe you can keep him there until he recovers. But I don't really see much value in Hunter Henry for the rest of the season, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the way your league is structured and how you view the tight end position. Because I do think that he's kind of one of those tight ends who is probably right in the middle of starting tight ends in a 12-team league. So if you find it useful, but that's when he's obviously totally healthy. I think you're probably best dropping and streaming tight ends if your bench space is limited from here on out.
All right, moving on to our last piece of news. Sam Darnold is out at least the next week with mono, and this illness expects to hold him out for 2 to 4 weeks until their bye in week 5. This is big news for the Jets offense and all the Jets in terms of fantasy. What do you guys think?
So I know he's being sequestered in the hotel rooms, so the other Jets shouldn't be affected by mono on account of Sam Darnold. But this doesn't seem to be for fantasy-wise anyway. Too big a deal. Sam Darnold was a borderline starter, even in 2 QB leagues. His replacement this Monday is going to be Trevor Siemian. I wouldn't stream him. Again, the Browns can be a tough matchup. And Siemian was even questionable with the Broncos a few seasons ago. So, I mean, definitely don't play Sam Darnold, but keep him on your roster. I wouldn't go forward with Trevor Siemian, though.
Just a quick thing. I think the Jets bye week is actually week 4.
Thanks. Excuse me.
So that gives him another week to sort of recover before they play. Yeah, no problem. Before they play week 5 at Philadelphia. I mean, it's kind of a really rough situation because just not even outside of the fantasy scope a little bit. The Jets had so much promise coming into this year, and all New York was very excited, to say the least, about the Jets this season, and this is kind of it's very arguably a season killer because their schedule coming up is really rough. They play Cleveland this week, at New England the week after that, then the bye week, and then at Philadelphia and versus Dallas. So it's a really tough stretch, and especially without their quarterback, they were hoping to really develop into one of the NFL's elite, at least in their eyes. It's really unfortunate, I have to say.
Yeah, definitely tough. And from a fan perspective, too, I don't know about you guys. I was really excited to see Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold duel it out, the top two quarterbacks from last year's rookie class, in terms of where they went in the draft. That was supposed to be a lot of fun. That's why this game's on Monday night. And now all NFL fans, unfortunately, won't get to see this matchup. So some sad news on that front. I hope Sam Darnold does get better in time to come back.
Yeah, tough news, especially for Jets fans, as you guys said, and a brutal schedule in the next coming weeks. I know you guys don't have much experience in terms of mono. This is definitely an illness that's pretty serious. As we said, it might take up to 4 weeks for him to recover. So I think in terms of fantasy, I really think that none of the Jets players outside of Le'Veon Bell and potentially Ty Montgomery, if Le'Veon Bell misses time, are fantasy relevant at all. I don't think Robbie Anderson, I don't think Jamison Crowder have any value with Sam Darnold out.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it was arguable that they had value with him in, so definitely with him out, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
All right, so with that injury news, we are going to now move on to a segment where we try to help you, the fans and the listeners of this podcast, solve injury questions, not injury questions, but rather roster questions on a week-to-week basis. So we're going to focus on week 2. We're going to have different scenarios in different leagues from our listeners and try to pick which players they should start from that list. So I think Amer has our first inquiry.
Yeah, so question 1 comes from an 8-team league. Storing is a half PPR, otherwise standard. This listener has a question about their flex spot. They are wondering whether or not they should start Tyler Lockett, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, or Matt Breida. What do you guys think?
So this one's tough because of the injury questions. Tyler Lockett, of course, we talked about this at the top of the show, has that back problem. Stephon Diggs, he was taken off the injury report, but he still does have that lingering hamstring from week 1. Joe Mixon, of course, is coming in with that injury that he sustained mid-game last week. And then Matt Breida he was the starter last week, and now with the Tevin Coleman injury, Breida is going to get the majority of touches. So this is an interesting question from the standpoint of who's healthy. Provided all 4 are playing and all 4 are at least probable, I'd probably go Lockett. Seattle does have Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was carved up by New England last week. Joe Mixon's injury looks serious enough where I think it's going to hamper him. And Gio Bernard is getting a lot of love from Zach Taylor. The Vikings, to me, just don't pass enough to start Stephon Diggs over Lockett, and then Breida's a little bit of a question mark. So out of those 4, I'd probably go Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you there, Bryce. I'd say if they're all fully healthy, you have to go Joe Mixon. He's playing at home against the 49ers, which I do think kind of lends itself to a bit of the run game for sure. And I think Mixon has a good shot at getting in the end zone because the 49ers defense really isn't an incredible defense, to say the least. And I just like Mixon over kind of Lockett, who really didn't show much in week 1. He had that long touchdown, but other than that, basically totally silent. Stephon Diggs also very rough week 1. So I'd have to go Joe Mixon here. And I also think that Matt Breida, with Matt Breida, you can't really trust the 49ers offense to really have enough to carry a fantasy relevant running back sort of at this time.
That's fair, Mike. And I do just want to amend my point a little bit. If Zach Taylor comes out and says Joe Mixon's fully healthy, he's going to remain our workhorse, Gio Bernard is not whatsoever going to take his touches, definitely start Mixon. And I guess this is on a personal note for me. I've always felt if you have a comparable running back and receiver to play in a flex spot, play the running back. It's guaranteed touches. Yes, the receiver might be a little more upside, a little more boom or bust, a little more risk, but you're going to get guaranteed touches. So if Joe Mixon is completely recovered, probably go Mixon, but it doesn't appear it's going to be that way. So I'd probably go Lockett.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the big question with this question that we've been given is the health of Joe Mixon. I think, of course, if he's fully healthy, he's a top 15 overall guy this week, just like every other week. He was drafted there, and I think if you drafted him up there and he's completely fully healthy and is going to take all the touches, I think he's definitely the guy. But with this ankle injury, it is a tough injury to come back from, especially just in 1 week. I know it's a bit of a mild ankle sprain, but he's still a running back. He still really relies on his joints to cut and to get downfield. So I think unless their coach comes out and their training staff says he's totally fine and he's going to have a full workload, I think I'm going to agree with Bryce. I think Tyler Lockett's the way to go. The Pittsburgh defense, especially in the slot, their slot secondary has been really weak for the past several years, and that's pretty much where Tyler Lockett does most of his work. I know he had a tough week 1, but I do think that he is a bounce-back candidate this week. So, like I said, Tyler Lockett is my pick for this question. If Tyler Lockett and Joe Mixon are both injured, my next guy would be Stephon Diggs.
I would agree with that.
All right. Great work on that one. I hope, listener, for that question. I hope that answers your question. I hope that helps. Now we're going to move on to question 2. I'm just going to preface this. Whoever sent this question in, I'm sorry for you. This is a tough situation to be in. So we have a 12-team full PPR league. In the running back 2 spot, we have David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears against the Denver Broncos. Latavius Murray, who's playing, I believe it's the Rams this week. And then new arrival in Houston, Carlos Hyde. So in this RB2 spot, guys, should this listener go David Montgomery, Latavius Murray, or Carlos Hyde?
Yeah, for me, I think this week, this is a tough decision, as you said, but I would go with Latavius Murray in this situation. I just think he's got, I think, the highest touchdown upside out of these guys. He is going to get those same touches. He got some touches last week against the Texans, and I think he's going to get some work this week. He's obviously not the number 1 guy, but the Saints offense is going to score a lot against the Rams. So I do think he is in line to get a touchdown this week, which I think boosts him above the other 2 guys.
I'd also have to agree with Latavius Murray in this situation. It's tough just because Murray is going up against the Rams D, which is very formidable. But even with that in mind, I do think his touchdown upside is so high because he seems to be the goal line running back for the Saints. So that's why I have to go Murray.
I'm going to agree with both of you. So a lot of diverse takes here. The only question mark I have with going with Latavius in this situation is that it is a full PPR league, and Latavius offers virtually nothing by way of pass catching because they do have Alvin Kamara. But looking at all three of these guys, Montgomery, Murray, and Hyde, none of them really have pass catching upside. Maybe Montgomery a little bit more, but Mike Davis and Tariq Cohen are there. Murray does have the touchdown upside, as you guys said. And somewhat of a hot take, and I know this is going against what I said in the ranking show. If I wasn't going Latavius, I'd probably go Carlos Hyde until we see Matt Nagy use David Montgomery the way he should be.
At least in the eyes, as he should be in the eyes of this fantasy owner.
Fair enough, in the eyes of this fantasy owner.
I'm sure Tariq Cohen owners would have something much different to say.
Fair enough.
And certainly those who have Mike Davis sleeping on their bench.
Oh, certainly. Mike Davis. Quick plug, too. Mike Davis is a dual handcuff. If he's still available, pick him up. Cohen goes down, he's the pass catcher. Montgomery goes down, he's the rusher. Mike Davis is dual handcuff. If you have either one, pick him up.
The dual handcuff.
But just getting back to this question of these 3 guys, as I said, Latavius is my pick just because I think the matchups are brutal for David Montgomery and Carlos Hyde this week. Montgomery's playing against Denver, who gave up a couple touchdowns to Josh Jacobs, but I don't think that the Bears offense is going to be that good. And Carlos Hyde is playing, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have a pretty good front 7.
Yeah, very tough matchup. And just, again, to this listener, I'm so sorry that you're in the situation, man. This is tough.
All right, so with that, we have our third question, which comes from a listener in a 12-team half PPR league. They have a flex question with a bunch of options here, so just stay a little tuned in for these next 30 seconds. The first option is Kenyon Drake, the Miami running back, who is going against New England. Second option is Phillip Lindsay, the running back for Denver versus Chicago. Third option, the Chicago running back, Tariq Cohen, at Denver. Fourth option, Corey Davis, Tennessee wide receiver with 0 points week 1 against Indianapolis. Other option, John Brown, whose Bills are going up against the Giants, and the final option, Danny Amendola, going up against the Chargers. So this listener has a lot of options. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think for me, this is a tough one. Just going down the list, I think Kenyon Drake, as we said in the week 1 recap, should pretty much be dropped at this point. I don't think he has much value just because the Dolphins are just such a mess at this point. So not Kenyon Drake for me. Philip Lindsay did look pretty good. He got a majority of the touches, the running back touches against the Raiders on Monday night. But I think this matchup against the Bears is brutal. The Bears are, of course, one of the top 2 or 3 defenses in the NFL this season. So I'm going to cross out Philip Lindsay as well. Tariq Cohen could be good, but those linebackers for the Denver defense are pretty good as well. So he's a consideration. But moving on to Corey Davis, I don't think Corey Davis has any fantasy relevance this year. It looks like he's the 3rd pass-catching option for Tennessee behind Delaney Walker and A.J. Brown. So crossing off Corey Davis, and then moving on to the next guy, John Brown. I think this guy would be my pick just because he's a speed guy. He had a good week 1. Now he's got a good quarterback with a big arm in Josh Allen. And, of course, they're going up against the Giants, which is always a plus-plus matchup. So, for me, John Brown's my pick. I wouldn't be mad if you picked Danny Amendola as well, but I think I'd give the edge to John Brown in this case.
Thanks for taking the hit at my Giants there, Amer. I know Mike and I really appreciate that.
Got to do it.
So...
I mean, I'm the guy who is going to stream the Giants, whoever is playing against the Giants as my
that's
defense
interesting
for the week going from here on out. So
yes, bad Giants
fan. Giants fan.
So obviously we have a lot of options here. So the way that I'm going to go about this is basically just rank them. Amer, I agree with you. If out of these 6, I'd go John Brown, number 1. Huge upside against the Giants. Big week last week against the Jets. Basically, the Giants have no secondary. John Brown's probably going up against DeAndre Baker, the rookie who got burned by Amari Cooper several times last week. John Brown's 1. Following him, it's going to be Danny Amendola 2 in my book. Phil Lindsay, actually 3. It's a tough matchup, but at least you know he's going to get touches. After him, Tariq Cohen. The only question with him is going to be game script. I think the Bears are going to blow him out of the water and come back, hopefully, with that offense with more of a vengeance. After Tariq Cohen, Corey Davis, and then after Corey Davis, Kenyon Drake, who, Amer, you hit the nail on the head, should not be rostered.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all bring up very good points here. I think I'm going to go with Amendola as the first option here because I really feel that in Detroit, they're kind of that they're a much more pass-focused offense, and I think that they probably will be down against the Chargers, so they're just the game script is going to have to kind of force them to pass the ball, and Amendola is their number 1 target, or at least was in week 1. So I think he's going to be my 1 here. 2 is John Brown for really all the reasons that you guys had stated before. 3 is Tariq Cohen, and I put him ahead of Lindsay because I think Lindsay, in facing the Bears, is going up against a tougher defense. And then I agree that Corey Davis and Kenyon Drake are kind of at the bottom of that list just because they're sort of lacking fantasy relevance at this point. At least until Corey Davis shows something else, or I should say, until either one of them shows something better going forward.
All right. So now moving on to our 4th question. This one's a little bit different. This one is a tight ends question, actually. So we looked at a couple flex and a running back question. Now we're looking at 2 mid-tier tight ends. So this listener is in a 10-team standard league and trying to play in their tight end spot this week. Mark Andrews against Arizona for the Baltimore Ravens, or David Njoku Monday night for the Browns against the Jets. Interesting choice here. What do you guys think? Andrews obviously coming off an enormous week last week, and Njoku with a touchdown catch.
Yeah, I don't think either of these guys are necessarily bad options, but my pick among these 2 guys would be Mark Andrews just because after that 1-week performance, it's tough to bench him, especially when you're going up against and again, a bottom 5 NFL team in the Arizona Cardinals, as Mark Andrews is this week. So I think Lamar Jackson's going to be a big play this week, and along with that is Mark Andrews for me. Not to say David Njoku's a bad pick this week. The Jets' defense isn't that great, and he did get a touchdown catch last week, but I think With the Browns Browns offense struggling a little bit last week, I think Mark Andrews is the pick for me.
Yeah, I think this is a tough decision considering game script off the bat will tell you that the Ravens are pretty much going to, I think, blow out the Cardinals. But last week we did see that the Ravens kept passing, so that's why I'm going to have to go Andrews as well. I think the Browns will beat the Jets on Monday night as well, so that means that game script will also say that the Browns will be passing too much. So both of these guys are hindered by game script a little bit, I would say. But even with that in mind, I think Andrews is the better option than Njoku, just because I think the Jets defense is a bit better than the Cardinals defense, and we also saw what the Ravens can do against a subpar defense in week 1.
I agree with you guys. I'd go Mark Andrews over David Njoku, but for actually a little bit of a different reason. For me, it's actually target share. Mark Andrews last week against the Dolphins led the team in both targets and receptions. David Njoku obviously has to deal with Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr., who got 13 targets last week. If the Ravens are in fact committed to the run, committed to passing, as they seem to be last week with Lamar Jackson, I believe he only had 3 rushes for 6 yards. If they are committed to the passing game, Mark Andrews seems to be Lamar's go-to guy. I know Robert Griffin was the one who threw him the touchdown, but still, Mark Andrews seems to be the number 1 pass catcher in Baltimore in a game where they should blow out Arizona.
I mean, as a receiver, if you're leading in targets, I hope you're leading in receptions. Because if you're not, that means you either got to get napkin to get the butter off your fingers or a better quarterback.
Well, I can already tell you the Ravens are going to need a better quarterback. Running back Lamar Jackson he's not going to do that again. He's not going to throw for 5 touchdowns. But another thing to note, Andrews had 8 targets, 8 receptions. So you're talking about butter. Mark Andrews seems to have glue.
Stick 'em, if you will.
Stick 'em.
So our 5th listener is in a 10-team PPR league, and they have a wide receiver 2 question. They're wondering whether to start Stephon Diggs, whose Vikings are going up against the Packers in Green Bay on Sunday afternoon, or Jarvis Landry, whose Browns are playing at the Jets Monday night.
Yeah, so for me, this is a tough call, especially because this is in PPR league. Jarvis Landry's always played that possession receiver role, get a lot of receptions, a lot of yards, but not always the touchdowns. And Stephon Diggs has always been a pretty explosive receiver when he's healthy. But for me, this week, I think Stephon Diggs would be my play for this one, just because he is off the injury report. He practiced in full Wednesday, practiced in full Thursday. So looks like he's a full go at the weekend. I don't think that the Vikings are going to be up as big and dominating this coming week against the Packers as they were last week against the Falcons. I think they're going to have to throw a little bit more, and I think that'll get Stephon Diggs involved in the game. I think he's going to get a lot of targets, and I think Stephon Diggs is the play for this week.
I'm going to disagree with you there, Amer. I'm very much of the belief that I'll believe it when I see it. Kirk Cousins only threw 10 times last week. Stephon Diggs only got 2 targets of those 10 attempts. Jarvis Landry is always going to get his share. Yes, Odell Beckham Jr. did have 13 targets and 7 receptions last week in week 1 against the Titans. Landry, you said it, is that possession receiver. He works the slot a little bit more. I think Jarvis Landry is always going to get his due, especially in PPR. The other thing to consider, the Vikings are up against Green Bay. That defense looks spectacular. Yes, the Bear offense did not look great, but the defense still looked very, very good. And you have to believe they're going to match up probably Kevin King, who's a big, tall receiver, up against Stephon Diggs, who's a little bit shorter. So we'll see how that plays out. And Darnell Savage is an unbelievable safety, or at least is showing to be that even just 1 week into his NFL career.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Bryce on this one. First, I just want to echo your thoughts about the Green Bay defense. I mean, they really did their best in shutting down the Bears in opening night of the NFL, which is very impressive considering the Bears had a relatively potent offense last year, I should say.
Yeah, that's debatable.
And okay, all right. But also, point number 2 there is just that Diggs really didn't prove anything week 1. I mean, the Vikings had a total of 97 passing yards in that first week. And for me in fantasy at this point, with a kind of borderline start, at least in this instance where you have a clear sort of option to replace Diggs, I like to take the baseball approach of taking the first strike. You're going to wait to see this fantasy player sort of produce in 1 week and use the replacements before that week, just so that fantasy player can show that they can deliver at least in 1 week and have done so in the past, as opposed to playing Diggs, who really didn't have a whole lot of points last week at all. And then on the Landry front, I do think that he's going to be targeted probably more times than Diggs in this upcoming week, which is always good in a PPR league. And he's also going up against the questionable Jets defense.
Mike, I'm surprised it only took you 3 whole shows to make a baseball reference.
I know. It's
wow.
I had to hold it back before then because I'd afraid I'd be kicked off the show.
For those of you who don't know, Mike and I are also huge baseball guys. Amir, you too.
Amir's a big Red Sox guy.
Hey, I'm into baseball, not as much as you guys, but I like my Red Sox.
Oh, Amir, I'm just excited for hockey talk soon.
Yeah, let's get it.
And you're able to listen to all of that right here on Between the 20s.
Oh, nice plug. Nice plug.
I like that.
With that, and that brings us to the end of the 3rd episode of Between the 20s, where we have hopefully run through your fantasy football questions coming into week 2 of the 2019 NFL season. We're all very excited to see them come through. And next week, we can go through it all again in week 3. But actually, be sure to check out our week 2 recap video after this one ends. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and also give us a like on Facebook. Check out all of our material there. With that, hope you all have a good one. See you next time.